Susan Rig.
Morning. Good to see you.
Hey, Ruth Simon. Wow. She's
Upside down. There we are. Yeah.
Morning.
Okay.
Good morning.
It's a real pleasure to see you all.
Hi, Lou. It's a pleasure to see you too. How's Anna?
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Anna's not bad. Not bad. She's getting there. It'll take
Good.
some time.
Oh, hey, look, it's Lou. How?
Anna's going to need a new knee operation. New knees.
I don't know if you can make the sound louder.
Hi, Rhoda.
Hi.
Lou, did Anna get her new chair?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
great.
yeah.
Happy to hear that.
Yeah. It works fantastic.
Good.
What are those white dots in it? What are the white dots on the left?
Oh, it's to join single. I don't know.
There, Violet. There.
Switch camera, and here switch to.
Okay, you need room to get in.
When he comes, he's
Hello, Weinstein.
You need room.
I joined the before there was one to join the general,
Fran, how are you doing, Fran?
and on top
Pretty
there,
good.
Okay.
Hey,
Just said.
that's good to hear.
Gloria.
and
Get Gloria's last name.
if you want to mute,
Knew her husband died.
there is something there.
No,
9:45.
she's speaking fast.
Somebody better go get the rabbi.
He forgot.
Solomon.
forgot last time.
Morning. Good
There are
morning.
the Stearns. Good morning.
There. Come on, Marcia. Let's see your face, Marcia.
Oh, there's Marilyn.
Hello, Marilyn.
Whatever you like.
Come on now.
Oh.
Hey, we're unmuted now.
Can you all give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, so this microphone isn't working. I have to go back to my, I'll use this microphone, but am I coming through clearly? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. You'll apologize, I'll apologize for muting you all. But as usual on this forum, if you have questions that pop into your mind as we have this class this morning, please feel free to use the chat button at the bottom of your screen. You'll see that already there, I posted, like I did last week, a PDF version of all of the sources that we're going to go through today. So if you prefer to have a hard copy of the sources that we're going to review, you can download that. For those who don't know how to do that, don't worry, you know that I'm going to post these sources anyway on your screen as we review them. As I reminded you in previous weeks, this class is being recorded. So if you're shy and don't want your face to be seen somewhere in internet land for eternity, then you can turn off your video monitoring. I would just ask that the name that you have underneath your screen, make sure that it's actually your name. If it's not your name, you can rename yourself if you know how. If not, just leave it. another thing I want to mention is there been a couple of incidents of Zoom bombing lately. Zoom bombing is when some unwelcome guest comes and takes control of the meeting. This happened in Montreal and in Toronto at 2 synagogue Zoom meetings in the past couple of weeks. If that happens to us during this session, just log off and we'll continue at some later point. I don't think it's going to happen because there's a lot of security here that I've put into the platform, but just in case it happens and someone is showing you inappropriate or anti-Semitic things, you don't have to put up with it. Just log off using the red button below. Or I'll just log out and close off the whole meeting. All right, so I hope we're ready to get started. I loved last class. I know I do these classes for everyone's benefit, but particularly they're for my benefit. I feel like sometimes last class I just loved. We've been talking about these conflicting ideas from our tradition. On the one hand, a view that says each Jew is responsible for his own actions and shouldn't get involved in managing or supervising the actions of others. And there's another view that says, no, the Torah was given to a people and Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh, we're all responsible for one another. And it's almost an insult to Jewish values to give up on our neighbors and friends when we feel like we can step in and help move them in the right direction. This has just been theoretical discussions, really, until we got to last week's class. The first real case, actually 2 cases we looked at that were very, very similar from the Middle Ages, where we had to take these ideas and see whether they apply and how to apply them. And what we saw is fighting between medieval rabbinic authorities, some saying we should get involved and some say we should not get involved. If you remember, there were 2 different cases. The first was an innocent woman who on Shabbat was taken, likely by her husband, to some mysterious place where they would apostatize to Christianity. And the question that was asked is, even though it's Shabbat, should we send a letter to this poor innocent girl's father and ask him to intervene, or should we wait until the next day? That was the first case we looked at. Then the second case was a case where it wasn't an innocent woman. It was probably a young Jew who was taken with Christianity for whatever reason, or maybe just upset with his family and wanted to get back at them for some reason. And thus himself decides that he's going to apostatize, and he picks a Shabbat to do it on. And the question is whether we should go after him on Shabbat, follow him where he's going, and stop this before it happens. And you know what happened in the debate. Those of you who were there last class, there were opinions that said that Shabbat ought not only to be broken for pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh is for saving a person's life. But actually, pikuach nefesh, saving a person's life, is a paradigm for what we call really important mitzvot. And one of the really important mitzvot is don't convert to another religion. And because it serves as a paradigm, and we have these cases of people who are going out to convert, we should do everything possible, including violate Shabbat, in order to save this woman and save this young boy. That was one opinion, based on the attitude of we're all responsible for each other. Judaism is a team sport. We have to be prepared to sacrifice one Shabbat in order to save someone else who will be ruining every Shabbat for the rest of his life. That was the calculus that was made in that example. And then there were other rabbinic opinions that say, are you crazy? It's Shabbat. Shabbat is restricted to pikuach nefesh. And this is not a case where someone's physical life is at stake. Deal with it the next day. And we saw how some of this came into really an argument about people's personal freedoms, and how this young man has the choice, as the Torah puts it, between blessing and curse, between life and death. And that's how God gave us the Torah, with freedom to choose our own paths. And we should acknowledge and respect people for the choices that they make, even when we disagree with them. And that is a profoundly individual sport attitude towards Judaism. Let people do what they want and do not get involved. Today we're going to look at the final case of this series. This is the last class in the series. A final case that I also think is very interesting that I want to review with you. It deals not with someone who's apostatizing, but someone who is already involved in a marriage that he shouldn't have been involved in, and how the rabbis handle that. And then we'll make some general observations about what we've been learning as we conclude the series. So I'm going to ask you, if you have the printout, to open up our sources, and I'm going to share my screen with you. Can you all give me a thumbs up if you see this source that's on the screen? All right. So this case comes to us from medieval Spain. And the rabbis are going to be faced here with a difficult decision. It's a very unusual case, fascinating one from medieval Spain. And as we go through it slowly, I'll explain what's going on here and why this case is particularly complicated. So who shall I pick on this morning? Shirley Ann, would you read the source that's on the screen from the Ritva?
You also asked about a person.
And Shirley Ann, I'll apologize in advance. I'm going to interrupt you numerous times.
That's fine. You also asked about a person who, based on incompetent guidance, unwittingly was intimate with a woman who was rabbinically forbidden to him as a relative.
So look at this case. Very odd. Based on incompetent guidance. In other words, there was this Jew, and he received guidance. I think when it says based on incompetence guidance, it's the Ritva is saying it wasn't totally his fault, but he got involved in a relationship with someone who was rabbinically forbidden to him as a relative. Now, you know, the Torah lists certain relationships that are forbidden to a person, but the rabbis added to that list, right? Others, like uncles and aunts, who are also forbidden, but not according to the Torah, but according to the rabbis. So this man made a big mistake. I guess that some guy who thought that he knew Jewish law said, yeah, you can be in a relationship with this woman. And the guy didn't know what he was talking about. And so this case came to the rabbis. What's interesting is that, like many of these cases, the facts on the ground are already being established. That's what makes these cases so fascinating, is that the rabbis are not being asked theoretically, what advice do you give, or how do you tell somebody to live his life? This is a case where the facts are already unfortunate and on the ground, and the rabbis have to deal with what's already occurred and how they navigate this. So this is a serious case, right? And it's going to get worse in the next sentence. Go ahead, Shirley Ann.
She had a child with him, and lives with him.
Oy, oy, oy. So it got worse. Not only are they in an intimate relationship, these relatives, but she has a child with him and lives with him.
He wants the community to permit him to have a Jewish wedding with her, like with anyone else, in order to validate the child, and then he will immediately divorce her with a get. If the community won't allow this, they will apostatize. Do we listen to him or not?
So let's make sure everyone here understands the case. He's not really interested in remaining married to this woman, this relative of his. He doesn't want to stay married to her. In other words, this is probably a very devout Jew who is very upset about the fact that he was led astray and had a child with a woman he shouldn't have had a child with. And, you know, I don't know why he didn't get married before, but, you know, I guess accidents happen. And he seems to be most concerned, not with her, because he'll divorce her right away. His concern is with the child, because this child, if it is discovered that the child was born of an unfit union, even rabbinically, the child will be sort of tarnished for the rest of his or her life with a tainted status. Not a mamzer, not a full mamzer. For those of you who know Jewish law, if you remember, a mamzer, a child born of a forbidden union, but a mamzer would have to have been the product of a union forbidden according to the Torah. But here it's a mamzer of rabbinic level, and that's still a pretty serious blemish to walk around with. And so what he's asking the rabbis, or what he's asking the community, is please just say that, you know what, we're sorry about what happened. We'll allow you to be married in this specific instance, because since it was a rabbinic prohibition in the first place, the rabbis have the authority to suspend the rabbinic prohibition in a case on a case-by-case basis. So he's saying, please suspend the prohibition, because this was just out of my control. I made a terrible mistake here, and save my child. By doing so, you will save my child, because it's a statement that the rabbis will make that the union is somehow sanctified, and therefore the child's reputation is saved. Please allow this, right? And then I'll divorce her right away. Let me just look. I see some questions popping up. Where is your link to the source you were going to include it on the chat screen? Marilyn is asking. It should be there, Marilyn. It should be the first thing I wrote on the chat screen. Should be a Dropbox link to the sources. And yes, it is the same source sheet as last week. We're on page 5. But does everyone understand the case? It's a very odd, unfortunate case. And the rabbis have to make the decision, should we suspend, for this case, the rabbinic prohibition against this impermissible marriage to save the child and his reputation, or what will happen, and this is important, what's going to happen if we don't? Shirley Ann, what does it say, that second to last sentence? If the community does not allow this,
they will apostatize.
They will apostatize. Why will they apostatize? Because they don't want to raise their child in a Jewish community where that child's status is tainted. That would be too heavy a sin, a burden for them to place on their child. And so they say, you know what? We would rather not be Jewish if you're going to put that on our child. Allow this marriage, or we're going to convert. Now, this is different than the case last week, right? Last week, we were dealing with people who are already on the road to conversion, and we could stop it as long as we violated Shabbat. Here, the rabbis are being asked to suspend a law for the sake of this family, or let the family just do their own thing. And if they choose to apostatize, it's their business and not ours. If they say we should suspend the law, that is some team thinking, right? That's Judaism as a team sport. Let's help this family out, or we will lose them forever, even if it means suspending a law. If they say, too bad, the guy is at fault, he was negligent, he didn't ask the right person, he never should have slept with this woman, and certainly never should have had a kid with her, that's a very individual-oriented way of looking at Judaism. And let's see what the Ritva says. Shirley Ann.
It seems to me we do not.
We do not. The Ritva is not a nice guy. Well, he's a nice guy, but he's not nice to them. What's he saying? Let them do their own thing. We will not suspend the rabbinic law for this family.
Better to lose him and others like him rather than actively and publicly uproot even one letter of rabbinic law.
Look what his concern is. We saw this a few weeks ago. Do you remember that something that distinguished the two cases in the Talmud? I'm going way back now. You got to refresh your memories. Back to the Talmudic sources. Something that distinguished those two cases. In one case, the rabbis were having a theoretical discussion. What would a chaver do if such and such happened? What is the behavior of an ideal Jew? What ought a Jew to do in such a situation? In the second Talmudic case, the one that was found in Tractate Shabbat, the rabbis were asked to make a public statement. Do we permit or do we forbid? And if you remember, one of the things the Tosafot said, who were trying to understand the difference between the two cases, they said in Tractate Shabbat, the rabbis are stricter. Why? Because their ruling will be publicized. It will be made public. And when your ruling is made public, a lenient ruling, there's a terrible danger. Think about what terrible danger might ensue. People are going to say, look, I can go and marry this person. I'll just get the rabbi, I'll make up some story later. And the rabbis will suspend the prohibition. When a public statement is made in the lenient direction, the fear is the rabbinic court will be seen as weak, and the people will be encouraged to do more improper behavior. Think about it. I say that we can relate many of these examples to traffic violations. Think about it. If everyone who was speeding got a warning, unless they were going 20 kilometers an hour over the limit, wouldn't that encourage more people to speed up to 20 kilometers over the limit? As soon as word gets out, you know what, the police aren't really, and by the way, this is almost true. Everyone knows the secret of the 401. When every time I drive back and forth, everyone knows they don't stop you when you're going up to 20. I know there's a couple of exceptions, but up to 20 kilometers over the speed limit, the cops won't stop you. I'm not saying I speed, God forbid, but I've heard. So nobody obeys the 100 kilometer an hour speed limit on the 401 because we know that the cops are not enforcing the rule. It's the same thing here. If the cops, in this example, the cops are the rabbinical court. If the rabbinical court is not enforcing enforcing the rule and making all sorts of exceptions and leniencies here and there. That's what the Ritva is concerned about. Better to lose this one family than to make a statement that rabbinical law is not serious and we can, you know, in a case of need, we'll just suspend the rules and let them do what they want. That might damage the credibility of the court and lead to more improper behavior. That's Ritva's concern. Look what he says, Shirley Ann, go ahead.
We are not responsible for cheats and crooks.
I cannot think of a statement that is more individual sport than that statement. We are not responsible for cheats and crooks. I guess he does not buy the story that he was led in the Hebrew, by the way, if you see it in the Hebrew where I'm pointing, Ein anu arevin la rema'in vela reshaim. Now, look at that word, by the way, in the Hebrew. Remember I said one of the most famous rabbinic statements that speaks to a team sport mentality is Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. We are all responsible for one another. You've all heard that before. What rabbi hasn't used that in at least a dozen sermons in his or her career? The same language is used here by the Ritva. Ein anu arevin. Okay, fine. Kol Yisrael arevim zelazeh. We are all responsible for another. But ein anu arevin la rema'in vela reshain. But we're all responsible for another, but not to bad Jews. To good Jews, we're all responsible to one another. But bad Jews, he doesn't buy the excuse that he was led astray. He said, listen, don't tell me about this guy being led astray. He had a child out of wedlock with some relative. That's not being led astray. This is a guy who was just stupid. And stupid people we are not responsible for. He's wicked. He's a cheat. We are not responsible for such a person. And to suspend the law for a cheat and a liar, forget it. Go ahead, Shirley Ann.
This case is even clearer than the case of the Chaver in Talmud Bavli.
This is the case that we reviewed already, right? This case is clearer than the case of the Chaver. Remember, in the case of the Chaver, we don't have to go back and look at all the details or it'll take the rest of this class. But if you remember the case of the Chaver, we say a Chaver looks out for his friend and is willing to tithe even from produce that is far away, which you're not supposed to do, but is willing to tithe from produce that is far away so that his friend will not sin. But this case is clearer. Why?
From which you brought proof, because in this case, the community sins and causes problems for others by leading them astray.
What's the community sin here? Think about what he's saying. The community is sinning in this case. Why is the community sinning? Because when the rabbis permit something publicly, the danger is that it is not just a statement about that person, but a statement that carries weight throughout the community. So here, if we permit this marriage, it's like the whole community giving its stamp of approval on a sinful situation. The rabbinical court in Judaism is often seen as a symbol for the whole Jewish community. When a rabbinical court of three interviews someone who, for instance, is interested in converting to Judaism, we say to the convert, you know, these three rabbis here, we are representing the Jewish people. in determining whether you are fit for conversion or not. And I think that's what the Ritva is saying here. We, to permit this marriage, and it's not even a marriage, to permit this child, to permit this whole situation, is us as a community taking on a sin for the sake of one person. Now, if you were a team player, you would say, well, that's called being a team. You all have to take a hit sometimes to save your teammate. But the Ritva doesn't see Judaism that way. His calculus is much more simple. Let's lose this family, it's one family, rather than make some public declaration which could lead to the loss of many, many more families, not their physical loss, but their spiritual loss, because they will lose respect for the authority of the rabbis and Jewish law.
People who see such a
Right, go ahead, Shirley Ann. Sorry, I interrupted you. People
who see such a marriage will think that marriage with such relatives are permitted, and rabbinic laws require even more reinforcement than biblical ones.
Isn't that interesting? So he's upfront with his concern. He says, yeah, okay, fine, I'll save the reputation of this child, but your wedding, people will still know that the wedding took place and that it was an impermissible wedding. And that will lead other people to say, oh, he could marry his uncle or his they weren't marrying uncles at that time. His aunt? Well, I could marry my aunt too. Fine. Right? So rabbinic laws require even more reinforcement than biblical ones. Isn't that interesting? Why do rabbinic laws require more enforcement than biblical laws? Biblical laws, we already said, are much more serious. But I'll explain to you his logic, and I'm sure this is self-evident to many of you. Biblical laws carry the weight of God's word. If God says don't do something, and you do it, you are liable directly to God, and that's serious enough on its own, where the rabbis feel that doesn't need reinforcement. It's self-evident that you need to be respectful and abide by biblical laws. It's the rabbinic ones that we look for ways to get around. Why? Because God didn't really say that I can't marry my aunt. That's not God. That was the rabbis. Who are they? They're just people. And if they say we can, then they can change their mind and say we can't. And that's why, according to the Ritva, we should be even more strict with rabbinic laws than with Torah laws. Because if we show that the rabbis are flip-floppers, well, if you can flip-flop on one thing, then you can flip-flop on everything. And suddenly, the rabbis lose all their credibility on every issue of Jewish law, because we see that they're just people who change their minds, and we don't have to take them seriously. Isn't that fascinating? Biblical law doesn't need reinforcement. Therefore, I mean, it's almost like you could say, therefore, we can sometimes be lenient with biblical law. Totally counterintuitive. But rabbinic law, there's already people saying, it's not really serious, this rabbinic law. We need to be strict when it comes to rabbinic rules. Otherwise, people won't take us seriously. You can go ahead and finish.
No, we flog him until his last breath, or until he sends her away.
Yikes.
If he continues to sleep in his sin, he bears his own guilt, and we are innocent of his inquiry.
Flog him. This guy who, that's how they handled things in the Middle Ages, not anymore. But the rabbis had the authority to punish, physically punish people who are acting inappropriately or sinning. And they say, and the Ritva says, that is exactly what we should do here. This is someone who is in a relationship with a forbidden woman. Let the child deal with the consequences of that. And as long as they stay together, he bears his own guilt. In other words, we don't bear his guilt. Don't tell me that I should feel guilty. Now, notice he doesn't bring up that he's going to apostatize, because I don't think the Ritva cares. I think he just says, let him apostatize. It's his sin. We don't get involved in the poor decisions of others. Thank you, Shirley Ann. Thank you for reading for us. I hope that you all found that to be a really interesting case and a strong vote for Judaism is an individual sport. Now, as fascinating as it is to read the Ritva's response, I think you'll be surprised to see, or maybe not surprised at this point, because I like to show you both sides. So you'll be bored to see that other rabbis disagree with what the Ritva says in a case that's not exactly the same, but that is very similar. I need to pick on somebody else to read. Who have I not picked on in a while? Marlene, are you able to read for us?
Yeah. Okay. I'm
I
sorry.
picked on you because many people say that they can't read it on their screen, and I see that you have glasses on.
I'm wearing my glasses, so it's fine. Where do you want me to start?
Picking on you. So do you see the question here?
Yes.
So just notice first where this is coming from, everyone. This is Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman, a German rabbi, but this is a modern case, right? Rabbi Hoffman lived at the turn of the 20th century and is therefore going to be dealing with the problem that I think is one that we can relate to a much greater degree. So Marlene, you can start with where it says—
the question?
Yep.
Okay. A Kohen married a Gentile woman in a civil ceremony, and she bore him a son who was circumcised, and the son then died.
So this is a really odd and tragic case. Remember the rule: a Kohen is not permitted to marry who? A convert, someone who converted to Judaism, or a divorcee. Now, I know we all know many Kohanim are married to converts and divorcee. This has been a serious, serious problem in modern Jewish experience, because many Kohanim, they fall in love with who they fall in love with. And if the rabbi says, we won't marry you, it's not like that's going to break up the union. So this is often a very complicated and painful discussion, whether a rabbi should or should not sanctify a marriage between a Kohen and someone that he's not permitted to marry. Now here, a complicated and sad situation is even sadder. First of all, the Kohen didn't marry, notice, the Kohen didn't marry a convert or a divorcee. Who did he marry? A Gentile woman. Oy, okay, that's not even a Kohen who's prohibited. That's all Jews who are prohibited from marrying a Gentile. It was done in a civil ceremony, and even worse, they had a kid together who was circumcised. I I don't know who or how. And then unfortunately, the son died. Go ahead, Marlene.
The Gentile woman is now tormented by the fact that she is not the same religion as her dead son and wants to convert and marry the Kohen according to Jewish religious law.
So take a look at what's happening here. Her son is buried in a Jewish cemetery. You can imagine how difficult it must be for her to know that her Jewish child will be in a different ceremony. You know, there's nothing worse than experiencing the loss of a child. Rahmana litzlan. This is something that's going to plague her whole life. And she just wants to be buried in the same cemetery as her son. Or maybe she wants to be of the same religion as her son. What's the problem going to be? Can you already foresee what the problem is? Well, if she converts to Judaism, then her husband, who's a Kohen, is now in a forbidden relationship. Now, he was in a forbidden relationship already, which is what makes this case so complicated. But this is what happens, right? It's real life. Already it's a bad situation, but before the rabbis were consulted, they had nothing to do with these series of events, this unfortunate series of events. Now they're being consulted and they're being asked, well, what do we do? This woman wants to convert, but once she converts, we've got another problem. She's going to be in a relationship with a man she's forbidden to. Go ahead, Marlene. Marlene, you can see the question. If the Beit Din...
If the Beit Din does not agree to convert her, there is a concern that she will get sick and go mad. What should they do?
So here, it's not that she's going to apostatize. The few cases we've been looking at the past couple of weeks is the case of somebody who's going to convert out of Judaism. She can't do that. She's already not Jewish. What's the concern? She will go insane. Right? But that's also a serious problem. Her psychological health will be impacted forever. Let's look at the answer. Go ahead, Marlene.
First of all, we should determine which is the greater violation, for a Kohen to marry a convert or a Gentile. It seems obvious to me that marrying a Gentile is a greater violation. I won't go on about
Okay, so let's stop there. First of all, a couple of people are asking, how is the son buried in a Jewish cemetery? So I'm assuming when it says the son was circumcised, that the son was converted. That may not be obvious from the story, but I'm assuming the son was converted. Just like we convert the child, even though the mother isn't Jewish, you can convert the child as long as the parents are promising to raise the child as a Jew. So let's look at what his answer says. Look at what his answer is. He says, first of all, what's worse? Let's just do the math. What's worse? Is it better that a Kohen marries a convert, or is it better that a Kohen marries a Gentile? It seems obvious to me that marrying a Gentile is a greater violation. He doesn't explain why, except to say the problem is that all of his offspring will be Gentiles. That's his calculus. If we permit, now it's a very weird calculus, because usually you say, well, is one a rabbinic level violation? Is one a biblical level violation? He's actually looking at this not through rabbinic lens, but through, I think, a very human lens. If this marriage goes on and they have more children, none of those children will be Jewish. Now you might say to him, well, why is that the case? The first child they had was circumcised, converted. Well, probably subsequent children, after the rabbis say, we're not helping you out, lady, probably the couple will turn their back on the Jewish community completely. And that's why they're saying none of the other children will be Jewish. So the concern of Rabbi Hoffman is a Gentile, him marrying a non-Jewish woman is worse because none of the children will be Jewish. Therefore, sorry, I don't know where you stopped, Marlene. Did you read this last line? Therefore?
No, I haven't read that.
Okay, so read this last line.
Okay. Therefore, in order to save the Jew from his serious violation, obviously they should convert the Gentile woman.
Okay, so this is how he starts off. Let's allow the conversion. Why? If we don't, all of the rest of their children will not be Jewish. However,
Do you want me to continue?
yes, please.
However, one could cast doubt on this. We don't tell someone to sin so that his colleague will benefit. And
Where did we read that? We read that line in Tractate Shabbat. You don't say to somebody, you sin, so that your friend doesn't sin. Now, what's the math here? Who's sinning? And let's see now. Who's the one who's sinning at the expense of the other? Go ahead, Marlene.
And our sages said to Berachot 306 that one should not accept a prospective convert who refuses to accept even a single point of law.
Aha! Now let me explain. What does it mean we shouldn't sin on the account of another? In this case, there's a principle articulated in the Talmud in Tractate Brachot, page 30b, that says, if a convert says to you, I agree to all of the rules of the Torah, except for this one, except for one, do you accept her or not? You don't. The rule in the Talmud is a convert must say, I agree to all of the mitzvot in the Torah. You can't say, I agree to all of them except for one. Now, what is the one that this woman is not accepting here when she converts? Now I'm training your minds Talmudically. The one that she's refusing to accept is the one that says a Kohen can't marry a divorcee. Because right after she converts, they're going to go get married. How do we know that? It's obvious. They've told us they want to be in a long-term relationship. They're already civilly married. So it's like a woman coming forward to the Beit Din saying, I accept the whole Torah, but not this one thing. Now, that's why when Rabbi Hoffman says, we don't take on a sin on the account of another, that's the sin he's talking about. The sin of the Beit Din, the court, which represents the whole community, accepting a convert that in every other case they would never have accepted. If anyone says, I agree to all of the mitzvot except for these, you would have told them to take a hike. But for this woman, because of the situation, we agree to sin, to take on this sin of accepting her, just so this family can have a better life together. And she doesn't go crazy. Now you understand why this case is very similar to the previous one. They're both about the welfare of a family at the expense of the community making a permissive statement that otherwise they would not have made. That's why this paragraph that starts with however, is really interesting and important. His first paragraph says, listen, it's obviously better we convert this woman. We'd rather this Kohen be with a convert than be with a non-Jew. But he realizes that in the process of making that happen, the Beit Din is going to sin. They're going to violate this important rule that we do not accept a convert who says, from the beginning, I refuse to abide by this one of the 613 mitzvot in the Torah. Let's keep going. Marlene?
Do you want me to start with the Gentile woman?
Yes, yep.
The Gentile woman, upon conversion, should leave her husband, but her husband wants to maintain her as his wife.
Right, so one of the solutions for this is to say to the woman, listen, we'll convert you. You can be the same religion as your child, but we expect you immediately to leave your husband's home because you're in a forbidden relationship. But he sees that that's not going to happen because the husband, they're a couple. They want to stay together. And if that is the case, go ahead, Marlene, if that is the case.
And if that is the case, then she does not want to accept the ban on a convert marrying a Kohen. So how could we accept her as a convert in order to prevent the Kohen from committing a major transgression?
Do you see how Rabbi Hoffman is stuck? What do we do? Do we violate this law as a community, or let this Kohen keep violating the law because we won't be flexible? So what does he figure out? Go ahead, Marlene.
One can argue that the obligation to tell a convert that full acceptance of the Torah is a prerequisite for conversion is only when the conversion is being done for the convert's benefit.
So look what he's starting to entertain. He's saying, maybe we'll just forget to ask this woman whether she agrees to take on all of the mitzvot in the Torah. Maybe we just won't ask the question. Because really, the fact that our obligation is not to tell this woman, by the way, you have to observe all 613 mitzvot in the Torah. He says, that's not really a requirement. It's only a requirement when the conversion is being done for the convert's benefit, right? In other words, when she's doing so alone. But here, she's not converting alone. Go ahead, Marlene. Let's see what he reasons.
But if we are converting her for the benefit of the Jew, then certainly she should convert, and the Jewish offspring should not be lost, and the Jew should not be subject to karet on her account.
Karet means excommunication.
Okay. Even if this means that they will both commit a lesser offense, for not only is a Jew committing a major offense, but she, even in her Gentile state, is doing something forbidden by contributing to the Jew's sin.
Look at this response, and it's fascinating. I wish there were Orthodox rabbis who thought like this nowadays. Let's pay attention to the solution he's sort of devising. He says, this conversion isn't really being done for only her benefit. The rules in this case have to be different because her conversion affects the status of not only her civil law husband, but of all the generations that will come after them. They're all involved in this picture. And when other people are involved, then the rabbis almost have a duty to bend the law as much as possible to save this Jew from a life of sin and his children from losing their Jewish status. We know that they're going to be living in sin. A Kohen should not be marrying a convert. We know that. But he says that's a lesser offense than the big offense, which is that they are in an intermarriage. Now we see the same language that we saw a couple of weeks ago. If you remember, mitzvah rabbah, that language. There are some mitzvot that are more important than others. Here he's using that same logic to say there are some sins that are more important than others. It's fascinating. Like, I'm telling you, there's no Orthodox rabbis left like this in the world today. At least I don't know many. I don't know any that are using this logic, saying, you know what, some mitzvot are more important than others, and in order to arrive at the big one, we should scrap the small one. I think many Orthodox rabbis now are motivated by the Ritva and his line. We can't appear weak. The Beit Din has to be strong. We can't give in on rabbinically ordained rules, or we'll be seen as flexible and no one will respect us anymore. Hoffman here is fearless. Don't worry. We are here for each other. This is a religion where we need to be concerned about people's well-being, and we need to make more Jews. And their children will only be Jewish if we're prepared to bend this rule against a Kohen marrying a convert. So let's think of bending that rule, and we can do it by not asking her the question when she comes before the Beit Din. Let's not ask her about, are you sure you're going to abide by all 613 mitzvot in the Torah? Let's just ask the question a little vaguer and just say, you know, do you agree to Judaism and all of its obligations? If she says yes, good enough. Don't go into details. Because this conversion is not just about her. It's about a whole family. And to save that family, to keep them in the fold, we have to be flexible. Let's finish up this sentence, Marlene.
And in this case, and in this case, there is a further concern that if the woman goes mad in the wake of being rejected for conversion, there will be a chalul b'Hashem. They will say, the Jews have no mercy on this Gentile woman, and they do not care if she gets sick and goes mad.
So look at what changes in the 19th, 20th century. We've looked from the beginning of this class at all the factors that the rabbis take into account when they need to decide, do we treat this case as a team sport where we're prepared to be flexible and even violate some minor laws? Or do we look at Judaism as an individual sport and we don't give in even an inch? This is a new qualification that we haven't seen yet. It's called Chilul Hashem. Marlene, do you know what that means when it says this is going to create a Chilul Hashem?
No. No.
Does anyone know? I need to stop sharing my screen in order to see your faces. Does anyone know what it means when Rabbi Hoffman is, you can raise your hand if you know what it means when the text says, the danger is that it's going to create a Chilul Hashem. Mr. Rosenstein.
Yes, a Chilul Hashem is a desecration of God's name, so to speak.
So why is that a concern here? What's the Chilul Hashem that's going to be caused?
Well, I guess you could argue that God's merciful, he's this, he's that, so, you know, we put down rules that we don't care about human beings.
I don't think that's what it is here.
I think he's worried, frankly, about the non-Jewish public.
Yes,
in ways
yes.
people didn't worry before.
Yes. That's what's interesting here that we haven't seen yet before. And that's what changes in the 19th, 20th century. The Jews aren't living in ghettos anymore. Now everyone's looking at what they're doing, right? Already Napoleon started having questions to the Jews in France about, do you allow intermarriages or do you not allow intermarriages? What's the story? So think about what the non-Jews, very good, Merv. Think about what the non-Jews will say when they hear that this poor woman, she lost a child. And the Jews did not have mercy on this woman and refused to convert her. and she went mad. All because of what? A rule that says a Kohen can't marry a convert? Some outdated, ridiculous rule that doesn't even make sense anymore in the modern age? Hoffman says, yes, and Shirley says the Jews have no compassion. Exactly. Hoffman says, doesn't that count for something? Doesn't that factor in? Chilul Hashem is a excuse me, I get worked up, I lose my breath. I forget I'm on Zoom. I hope I'm not sounding like I'm yelling into the microphone. It's hard to know how I'm being transmitted on the other side. But he's saying, this is an Isura Rabbah. This is a big sin. Chilul Hashem, you're publicly desecrating God's name because the Gentiles will say, look how awful the Jews are. Look at how outdated and ridiculous that Torah is. This poor woman was driven to madness because of their outdated practices. And Hoffman says, you must factor that into this discussion. Have mercy on this family, be flexible with the rules. He is a perfect counterweight to the Ritva, who wasn't willing to even come close to where, Ritva says, we're not responsible for sinners. This Cohen married you can imagine what the Ritva would say about this case. Cohen married a Gentile? Ein anu arevim al reshaim. We're not responsible for sinners. This guy's the worst sinner on earth. Let him take a hike. Go convert. We don't need you. Hoffman says, no, that's not what's going on here. These are unfortunate circumstances, and the way we react leniently or stringently can have tremendous consequences on the whole community and for the Jewish people for generations to come. And therefore, we need to be flexible. Fascinating, fascinating case. So here we are at the end of the day, and I don't think I've resolved much in this tension, which was, by the way, my whole plan from the beginning. I wasn't going to give you the right answer. Is Judaism a team sport? The answer is sometimes yes. Is Judaism an individual sport? The answer is sometimes yes. But look at the fascinating discussion that happens over centuries between rabbis from different places and different eras who call us to take into account all different factors, many, many different factors. I think we've seen at least a dozen in determining when to view a specific case with that team attitude and when to view a specific case with that individual attitude. And I think nobody articulates that better than the Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. And I want to just share with you as our final source his thoughts on this topic. Merv, since you answered the question right, I'm going to punish you by making you read this last source for us.
All righty. For me, the general rule is that the decision to permit one transgression in order to avoid another one must be handled with extreme care. It is similar to the healing of the body.
So look at this. I think this metaphor that the Netziv uses is beautiful. He says this is about the Jewish people. The Jewish people are like a body.
Right.
We're one body. Mm-hmm. Keep going, Merv.
Yeah. If a doctor sees that a man's hand is in great pain, sometime he decides to amputate it so that the pain will not spread to the rest of the body and endanger him.
So that's who's that like that we saw today? That's the Ritva. That's the Ritva who said, amputate him.
Right.
Let him go his way. Amputate because it's a disease. Sinning is a disease. And if you don't cut off the arm, sometimes it'll spread throughout the whole body.
Exactly.
But sometimes
he decides it's better that he should suffer the pain and keep his hand.
Now, I love this image of a doctor because so many times, those of you who've dealt with complicated cases yourselves or in your own family, very often, I would say most of the time, a doctor doesn't come to you and say, this is what you should do. Most of the time, if you have a good doctor, the doctor will say, here are your options. These are, the body is infinitely complex. And if the body is complex, then 15 million Jews are infinitely more complex than the body. And when handling each of these cases, it's not clear. Just like a doctor doesn't say very often, here's what you should do. The doctor would say, here's what we can do. Here's our different options that are available to us for dealing with this problem. And each one will have consequences, both positive and negative. If you cut off the arm, you're going to lose your arm. Yeah, you'll stop the pain from spreading, but you'll never have that arm again. If you keep your arm, you will have pain for the rest of your life, but you'll keep your arm. I love this metaphor. I think it's perfect to match some of the discussions that we're having in this class. Go ahead, Merv.
This decision can only be made with the considered judgment of a number of doctors because both opinions are dangerous.
Now you know this is coming from a Jew, because only a Jew suggests multiple, that's a famous Jewish line. You can't just go to one doctor, you have to have multiple opinions.
Absolutely.
That's why Jews are such popular patients in the Toronto healthcare system.
And you really don't know what to do, right? L'embarras du choix, too much choix. Similarly, healing of the soul that is sick in this way requires a considered judgment of several Torah scholars.
Look at that. Wow.
And God will deliver a judgment in their midst so their ruling is not destructive, God forbid.
Just like a person in caring for the body gets multiple opinions, weighs factors, there's no clear answer. It's the same way with a soul. When you're dealing with the soul of the Jewish people and the soul of a person, you should consult multiple rabbis, understand that no answer is going to be right or wrong. You just have to have faith and hope that God sends down in his own way a ruling that is not destructive, God forbid. When I was in Montreal, I don't know how you all feel about this team versus individual sport mentality, but I can relate it to an experience that just happened to me this year. I was sharing a hotel room in Montreal. We're at a wedding, and I was sharing a hotel room downtown because it was the wedding was downtown, and I had to get there after Shabbat, so I decided just to stay in a hotel. I shared a room with my cousin, who's more observant than me, more Shabbat observant than me. And one of the ways he's more observant is he will not use the key, because the key is an electronic device on the door on Shabbat, and I will. Now, this is a big problem. If you're Shabbat observant nowadays and staying in hotels, and you're very careful about that key, this is a disaster, because most hotels now, that's the only way they have to get in. In Israel, interestingly, all the hotels in Israel, you can have a key or the card to enter the door. But that's the luxury of being in Israel. If you want to go anywhere else in the world, chances are you're going to have a key. And I was so angry at my cousin because he said, we have to leave the door open on Shabbat by using one of the locking devices. You can keep the door a little bit open. And I said, are you nuts? I'm keeping all my stuff in my room, my suitcase, my passport, all my things. And you want me to leave all my things here with the door open? And I was I was upset with him, not because of the door, but because I said to him, listen, let me use the key. It's not your sin that I'm using this key. It's my sin. And if God wants to hold me account for using the key, it'll be on me. And I'll leave the door open for you. I'll hold the door open for you. My anger with him was connected to what we're learning here, because I was upset that he was treating Judaism as a team sport. I was an individual guy. I said, your business, what you do, my business, what I do. And the freedom that we each have to practice our religion as we see fit is something I don't think any one of us would want to give up. And when we're being judged for our own level of practice and observance, it feels terrible to have somebody else say to you, I don't accept what you're doing, and you need to step it up or be more restrictive in this case. But I think in time, as I think about what happened, there is something nice as well to his view of the world. It came off at the moment as judgmental and arrogant, and I wanted to scream at him. In time, you know, especially as we study these sources together, and we see so many cases where we wish the rabbis were more inclusive, I understand and appreciate where he was coming from, saying, no, I don't want you to sin, because your sin is just as hurtful to me as my own. I'm just as concerned about that sin as my own. And I think without that sense of mutual responsibility, what kind of a Jewish people are we? So when somebody comes to us with judgment, trying to help us on the right path, it might feel, I think, like in my case, in that moment, you feel defensive and angry and judged. But I think with time, and I hope in reviewing these sources, we can come to appreciate that in some cases, that sense of mutual responsibility, mutual accountability, can help to sustain the Jewish people, keeping the body whole. Nobody wants a Judaism where we don't care about each other and where we say, you just go off and do what you do. I'm the leg, you're the arm. You cut off the arm if you want. The leg will survive on its own. Eventually, when you slice off, here's another metaphor. Eventually, you slice off so many parts of the body, there's no body left. This is the challenge of being Jewish. It begins with an individual relationship. But we have to remind ourselves from time to time that God gave the Torah to a group of people. And among the values in the Torah, what we read last week, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving our neighbor as ourselves, having concern and care for your fellow Jew, that comes along with that Torah. And I'm sorry that I'm not able to provide you with a clear answer, but I think the beauty of Judaism is always found in its tensions and in its complexity. And I hope through this study, we were all able to get a little piece of that. So let me just look at the comments. We have 3 more minutes. Did your cousin agree, or did you leave the door open? You want to know the truth? So he left the door open, and I waited for him to walk out of the hotel, and then I unlocked, and then I'm not a nice guy. And then I moved the latch and shut the door. Is this the same cousin who criticized you for using Zoom at the Seder? No, not the same cousin. I have a few critical cousins. God bless our critical cousins. So someone, Dr. Rahmani said, Rose said that in cancer treatments, they also have developed the Jewish way, or at least the way that was being advocated by the Netziv, that in cancer cases, you don't have one doctor anymore saying this is what you should do, but cases of tumors are being viewed now as a conference of different doctors, and they collaborate. That's the kind of care that's being used today with tumors that I think the Netziv is advocating for in all of these cases that we've been wrestling with since the beginning of the class. Well, I thank you all for your attention. I've really enjoyed studying with you. And I will let you know, we're stuck in our homes and looking, and I'm very grateful that so many of you have participated and felt like this was a worthwhile use of your time. So I think I have to come up with another series to do. So check your emails, and I look forward to another series. I have to put something together, and I hope that many of you will continue to participate and use this quarantine time. If we can't do much else, at least we can use it to grow our appreciation for Judaism and our wisdom at navigating life. Some say that that's one of the gifts of this whole situation. So I wish you all a wonderful day.